My name is Pia De Saleni. I'm the president and executive director of the Global Institute for Church Management. We support our program, our flagship program of church management in Rome, which was started at the behest of the Vatican several years ago. We're now in our 5th cohort. You can get more information on our homepage, gicm.org, which can connect you to the PCM page. We also have banners for several upcoming events. We'd love to have you visit. And today we are starting our 3rd webinar in our series, Managing the Assets of the Church, and we'll be focusing on urban real estate. Now, the interesting thing here is that obviously there are lots of assets, but we've decided to focus these first few months on real estate, and that's because of our collaboration with the Fitzgerald Institute for Real Estate at Notre Dame. So I'd like to turn this over to David Murphy, the Director of Church Projects of Church Real Estate at FIRE. And as we say, it's kind of an unfortunate acronym because FIRE is usually the last thing that you want to happen to property or to real estate. But anyway, David, if you could just join in for a couple of minutes.
Yes, it's great to be with you all. And while FIRE is maybe not the best for property, we like to say that we're on fire with the Holy Spirit. And it's a joy to be with you all from South Bend. And as Pia mentioned, we have a very exciting collaboration between the Fitzgerald Institute for Real Estate, FIRE, and the Global Institute for Church Management. So it's a fun quiz of lots of acronyms for you today, GICM and FIRE. But we're thrilled to be with you. And my role here is the director of the Church Properties Initiative. So the Catholic Church is both the largest provider of social services in the world, educating and serving more people than anyone else. But we also have, as a byproduct of that, the largest portfolio of real estate that's not a state. So if you counted up all of the acres of monasteries and parishes and schools and hospitals, orphanages, homeless shelters, we'd have more land than the country of France. So it's a very big church spread around the world. And my job is to help kind of bring together ideas of looking at both the challenges that come with that, but also the opportunities. So we're working with PIA and the Global Institute for Church Management to provide church leaders, the laity, and lots of other people who are kind of tangential to this process or directly involved with the opportunity to reimagine the church. And our 3 panelists today, reimagine the church in the sense of its real estate, not necessarily its beliefs, but the 3 panelists here today, which we're so excited, will be talking about that. So as Pia mentioned in our previous webinars, which will be available for viewing, we've talked about innovation within the church for church property, rural church issues. Today we have urban. December, we'll have looking at the legal complications around church property. So how do we protect our legacy of this land legally? In January, we'll have a conversation on innovative financial structures. And then in February, we'll have an in-person conference in Rome, as well as a live streamed event for 3 days from February 7th to the 9th, looking at all these different facets, having members from the church, cardinals, bishops, women religious, and the laity as well, joining us to have an in-person discussion. So put that on your calendar. There'll be more information both on the Fitzgerald Institute for Real Estate website, as well as the GICM website, and we'd love to see you there. And with that, we'll turn it over to Pia and the panelists.
Thank you, David. Last week, we met to do kind of a run through as we do before each of our webinars. And I felt particularly blessed, and I feel blessed at meeting all of the panelists we've worked with. But one of the things, the theme that came up over and over again was really the importance of place, and in so many cases, the home. And as we know, the church talks about the domestic church, which is the first church, that's the family. And guess what? Families need homes, and homes need a place. And with that, I just want to introduce briefly our panel. We have Sophie Janssen, who's from Italy. She's representing the Sant'Egidio community, which is a lay movement that has been around for several decades and is involved in projects around the world. She has been directly involved in one of its art labs for people with special needs, as well as Trattoria degli Amici, the Friends restaurant, which is a great restaurant in Rome that employs individuals with mental disabilities. It's also inspired other restaurants in the area to adopt similar hiring practices. Curtis Johnson is with us. He's the Vice President of Housing Strategies for Catholic Charities USA. He has 30 years of development and property management experience with faith-based groups, housing authorities, governments, nonprofits. And again, this is, Curtis, what came through so strongly in our conversation was your understanding of protecting legacy and creating homes, really spaces for people. Francis talks about the need for the encounter, Pope Francis, and the encounter has to happen in a place, and it's a variety of places, but your work is quite beautiful. And then finally, we have Brian Black, who's the president of Harmel Academy of Trades. This is a unique program to school to prepare and equip Catholics to be able to do the technical work required to transform unused properties, as well as other technical labor. He spent years running the facilities management for urban parishes in Grand Rapids. So he's seen a lot of transition, change, and has had to balance competing resources, competing interests, the emotions that are tied to local communities when change is introduced. And so I'm excited to welcome you all, and again, very grateful for your participation. Perhaps if I can just I'll have each of you let us know how you got involved in your specific urban project. I mean, you're using urban real estate space for your unique apostolate or ministry. So Sophie, if we could start with you, that would be lovely.
Thank you, Pia, and hello to everybody. So as Pia said, I'm a volunteer in the community of Sant'Egidio since several years. More particularly, I'm involved in the work with people with special needs, where we meet. We have art labs. We think it's important to give a space to, especially the poor people or the people with more fragilities in the city. So we have these art labs and we have this restaurant, which is a very special place, because I think we need to give a place to everybody. The church is called to do that, and these are places where we had the fantasy that we try to be creative to find these spaces to meet and to be allowed to give people their dignity. I don't know, Pia, if I can talk also about Villetta della Misericordia, or you want me to talk about it later? Okay,
please,
so because I think it's a beautiful example if we talk about estate and about how we're making use of the buildings, the patrimony of the church. There is this story of the Gemelli Hospital, which you will maybe know. It's the big Catholic hospital in Rome. On their grounds was an empty building, and on their grounds live also many homeless people. Many of them sleep in the waiting room of the emergency unit in the night. Many of them are very ill, people on the street, most of them abandoned by their family, by their friends, and so the loneliness is very hard. So with the community of Sant'Egidio and our experience we have to take care of those who are fragile in the city, we proposed to the Gemelli Hospital to use that empty building to host these homeless people. And it became a very nice collaboration. I like to call it a synergy between the hospital, the community of Sant'Egidio, the foundation who owns the building, and also the Catholic University who is on the same grounds. And all these people together, they managed that this building was renovated, and this building now hosts 20 homeless people. It was in the year of mercy between 2015 and 2016 that this initiative was started, as Pope Francis asked to leave tangible signs of mercy in the city. And so now these people live there. The house is completely run by volunteers. So these homeless people have a shelter. For many of them, it's like a bridge towards a more final house, which we help them to search. But for the time being, they don't live on the street anymore, which is very important. If we talk about the church patrimony, well, let's use this patrimony to keep. But the street is very hard. It takes away every dignity of a person, and so it's a beautiful example. I think this house is called La Villetta della Misericordia, so the house of mercy. And so these people there they have their rooms, they have their volunteers who care for them. They receive food, which is catered for by the university. And so it changes their life radically. And so there we see that sometimes with some fantasy, some small, to find also ways of collaborate among various institutions inside the church, that we can really change the life of people. And that's what we really should, that's the most important thing. That's the mission of the gospel of the church. So for the time being, I would say this is the most important, first input.
Thank you, Sophie. And I just want to remind all of our participants, we'll be doing question and answer at the end of the webinar, so like the last 15 to 20 minutes. So if you have questions, the best place to put them, is in the Q&A box it should be at the right of your screen. Some questions will be incorporated into our panel conversation, and others will just address straight at the end. But please feel free to submit your questions. It's always good to hear from you. Curtis, would you give us a little bit about your background and the work that you do? Again, I love the legacy aspect of your work.
Thank you, Pia, and thank you, David, and the Fire Institute at Notre Dame for having me here today. It's a joy to be with you from Catholic Charities USA, and we serve the Catholic charities across the United States by providing support, and in particular, in my area, is affordable housing. And our leader, Sister Donna Markham, CEO, President and CEO, who was the first woman to head up Catholic Charities USA, came in and established a strategic planning process. And one of the things we found, hearing from the member agencies, was a need for more affordable housing for the people that the Catholic Charity Social Service agencies were serving. And with that, we also learned that housing is one of the social determinants of health. So it's very key to just the formation and the maintenance of the family and individuals, and including their dignity. And with that, I came to Catholic Charities USA about 5 years ago, after having served almost 16 years in the Diocese of Camden, New Jersey's area, where I developed and managed affordable housing, often using or converting church property that was underutilized or not used, and making it into affordable housing. And the legacy aspect that Pia talks about is we often did this, what we call a parish-based affordable housing strategy, where we would partner with the parish. Our housing corporation would partner with the parish to become a part, who was already a part, an established part of the community, to work with them and develop the type and the affordable housing they might need, whether it was seniors or families or homes, whatever their community was in need of. And we did that by incorporating an acquisition cost for the property into our development costs, and also incorporating aspects of the church, of the parish, into the project, whether it was by naming it as relations to the parish that was there, or even just making sure that parishioners, parish council was a part of the process. And so for us, we continue to do that work as we go around the country. Just yesterday, I'll give you an example. I was in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, with the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, working on a property that the Archdiocese did in combination with the Augustinians, and on a property that was for seniors, for very low income seniors, in an area of the city that is very affluent. So it was really a proud time to see the Archdiocese take its stand and say, in this place, we're going to have affordable housing. In this place, we're going to have just make sure that it is represented in a place where all people can live and stay. So that's what my work has been. And out of those, scary to hear Pia say it, 30 years, I can say at least 2/3 of them were in a faith-based institution, whether it was with Catholic Charities or other faiths. And it's been a passion of mine for many years. And to have discussions with the church and talk about ways that that one of the options is to repurpose this property to change lives, to get parishes back into working hard to help others, and where they already have an established great reputation in the community is just powerful. So thank you.
Thank you, Curtis. Brian, just a little bit about your background again and some of the projects that you were doing in Grand Rapids. One of the things that I was struck by during our conversation was that it seemed like you had a minimal amount of conflict, which is unusual when we start talking about change and all the emotions tied to church properties and so forth.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to be here. Yeah, I think I want to in particular talk about almost the spiritual aspect of property management. So for the last 15, 20 years before I started this academy, I was directly involved in the maintenance of historic buildings and some non-historic buildings. And one of the things that became clear to me was the importance of having an approach to building maintenance, which is often something that's quite mundane and not very interesting to people, to almost give it a spiritual dimension, so that as we look at a building or a piece of real estate as a gift from God, which it is, and really bring that to the fore in conversations about investment. What do we do with the building? How do we spend our money wisely? And thinking more again about that property as a gift was one of the ways that I've seen some success with historic buildings. A lot of them looking quite a lot, like any of the skyline you'd see in Rome or anywhere else in the world. Now, I have my experience, of course, is quite local here in Michigan, which will be different than the other cultures and other financial situations around the world. But I think at the heart of it is to know that when there is a building, whether it's anything from an orphanage to a grand cathedral, the important part is to understand that building as a gift, and to know that your commitment to maintaining it well has to be intentional, it has to be thorough and professional. So the things that we look for that we were able to be successful in is professionalism with the tradesmen who are actually doing the work, and that's something that was pretty consistent when the local representatives of that, the local steward of that building or piece of property, the extent to which they could find a actual relationship with a skilled tradesman or skilled worker was very important. And to build that relationship spiritually and personally rather than financially is something that I think is really important, so that as this property and this real estate moves forward in the service of the church and in the service to man, that there's a group, a family almost, of people who are committed to the success of that piece of property relationally rather than financially. And I think that is one of the three things I would highlight in success. So if we're given this gift, we have a responsibility to maintain it well. And the way to do that is through generosity. So maybe it's not through the lowest bidder. Maybe it's not through someone who has, all good intentions but no skill. That relationship and that commitment, that dedication has to be there for that piece of property carried forward in time to serve people. And that's often one of the more mundane and not very interesting parts of this is that actual, the roof leaks. So do we hire someone, a handyman, to scramble up there and patch it together, or do we develop a program? Do we have a binder on the shelf that says the last time we repaired this was done by this person, he did an excellent job, and let's form that long-term relationship with them so they can themselves be steward of this property too. It gets down to that mundane level, and the real beauty of that is, like any relationship or any community, and I know that Sophie and Curtis and David too have been in this experience where you see that community come together to solve a problem and flourish and then move things forward is very rewarding. So rather than it be a point of conflict, let's find the low bid, let's get this over with and behind us, it becomes a point of pride and a point of relationship for the community that, hey, we did this well. Our building, our piece of property continues to thrive and serve the community. So that's been my experience here, my local experience, and I think it's one of the things that I've benefited from, and I think the buildings have too.
Thanks, Brian. An important point comes to mind that even though we're speaking from mostly the United States, if Sophie from Italy, the principles are the same. And this is what we teach our students in Rome. It's best management practices, best business practices. And so that's where any of these projects can be translated into a local setting. And we're seeing some of our students do that with their capstone program projects that are required at the end. Again, it's so fascinating to me because before I started diving into this topic, I never thought of real estate as particularly having this personal or relational dimension. And Sophie, could you tell us about some of what you did with the homeless and the hotels during the pandemic? Because again, that's a very innovative use of space. And it sounds like you had much better success in Italy than we did in the United States.
Yes, I think that the first aim is to build a community. As also Brian and Curtis said. So when we have a place where we can come together, you can also build a community, and that's what we are called to by the gospel and by Pope Francis. To come back to your question, in the pandemic, yes, there was this beautiful experience because it's been a very difficult time for many people, the pandemic. As you know, Italy has been very severely hit, but let's say also many other countries after us. There was a very severe lockdown, so it was difficult life for the homeless because it became very difficult for them to live on the street because you were not allowed to be on the street, first of all. But the loneliness was very tangible at that moment because many of the homeless people, usually they can get some direct solidarity from bars or restaurants where they live around, and all that had gone because there was nobody around. So the loneliness was very hard. And at the same time, also many other people suffered from the pandemic. And for example, the tourist sector, the hotels were all empty as traveling was prohibited. So what we did is bring these two things together, and we asked some hotels if they were prepared to open their hotel for the homeless. We guaranteed them that we would do some fundraising to pay, of course, not a complete commercial price of high season tourists, but to collect money to give the hotels the possibility to keep some persons employed, to keep the hotel running in a certain way. And the homeless had a shelter, which was so important. So, and fortunately, some of them, they loved the idea and they were even very happy. They were very happy experiences where, of course, we try to help with the volunteers because we know the homeless people. And we have this kind of relationship with them, and we are very convinced of this. When you enter, I talked to you about the Villetta della Misericordia, we have our soup kitchen. When you enter one of these places, and in this case also the hotels, the street ends, and also the hard world of the street. And so it allows people to have a different kind of behavior and a different kind, we find really their dignity. So it was a beautiful moment where the economy was helped because people, we avoided that some people lost their job and got in great economical difficulties. And at the same time, the homeless had this place where they could stay and where they really could find a shelter. So yes, that was a very important way to find the mission of the church needs property and needs a physical place to stay. And so let's try to be creative in this way.
Thank you, Sophie. Curtis, I'm wondering if you can speak to the profitability of these projects and these endeavors, because obviously we can't afford, in most cases, the church can't afford to run at a loss. So where does profitability come into play, and how do you make these projects sustainable?
Absolutely. Great question, Pia. And I will say this, what we always try to do is to work with whether it's the parish or the diocese, archdiocese, or even an order or sisters, to make sure that we can incorporate at least some kind of acquisition cost into the development. We recognize that real estate is valuable and it's important because, number one, as Brian and Sophie talked about, serving a mission, but also making sure that it remains viable for many, many years. And so what we do is we work to, say, for example, in one of our parish-based strategies, we'll build in an acquisition cost that works for the population they want to serve. Now, it may not be as much as you could get from an outside entity, but the beauty of working with your housing corporation of the diocese or the Office of Housing and Catholic Charities is it remains within the archdiocese or diocesan family. The property just moves to another entity and you get something for it. What also happens has been, in my experience, is that once you come in and do that new project on the that's in proximity to the church and the parish hall, and you put that new senior building in that's anywhere from $15 to $18 million, it raises the value of the other properties around it. So there's an impact from that comes in doing that project. So, and finally, when we acquire a property from our sister entity, whether it's the parish or the diocese, and then we do the project, we take the burden of maintenance, we take the burden of insurance, we take the burden of all that to serve this particular population that we're serving. And it also, as I said, adds value to the entire area and those properties around it. But it also is serving some of the very lowest income people and households that are there. So I'll say there is always a return on investment. We recognize that we're dealing with real estate, but we can deal with it and work with it to meet our mission.
Thank you, Curtis. I wanted to bring in David back for just a moment. David and I have had a few conversations over the past few months where I think he at Fire has some key ideas about transforming spaces to serve for housing. And David, maybe you can jump in for just a couple of minutes.
Sure. I think, it's so important to understand, both the spiritual mission of the church, where we're going to operate and look a little bit differently than Airbnb or some of these other secular institutes. But we also have to recognize the reality in that the context in which we are that includes the need for money. So, Brian gave the example of the roof is leaking. We have to be innovative and understand that to do that and to pay someone a living wage to support their family and stuff, like there needs to be an economic component to it. Curtis with the affordable housing offers really innovative strategies there. But I think it takes the church being pretty willing to be a little innovative and think outside the box to, when they're confronted with some of these challenges, to say, we're faced with declining mass attendance. We're faced with, which means there's maybe less collection coming through, to really look outside, maybe turn to industry in some of these ways to say, okay, well, how can we use the assets that we have to kind of solve for some of this? So I think first off, you have to have an evangelistic component. It's, like, how do we witness and maybe get people drawing back in? But I think that can be done differently in new ways. So I've had experience with seeing examples of repurposing convents and rectories that are abandoned, going in and creating young adult Catholic housing to provide both housing that's under maybe the rental market rate in a place like San Diego or Chicago or even South Bend, to provide affordable housing, workforce housing really, for these young adults. It gives them community and it brings life kind of back into the church. So that way you're getting a revenue stream. You're also getting a cohort of young adults who are very intentional about their faith. We're going out and maybe bringing people in. We've seen innovative uses with parking lots saying, okay, we've got this parking lot, getting creative, saying like, well, let's put up some Edison light bulbs, maybe some planter plants, and bring in food trucks and have a young adult event where all of a sudden that space is turned into social capital that can translate to fiscal capital. So many different ways of keeping that there. It could go all the way up to a very sophisticated 99-year land lease where you lease out a parcel of the land to a developer. They come in. Ideally, that developer would be Curtis Johnson doing affordable mission-based housing, but we've seen other models of that where that's a very sophisticated lift in certain neighborhoods, or depending on zoning or economics, it might not work to have. You might not need affordable or senior housing. So what we're trying to do is present optionality and present a wide array of what the church is already doing. So you can look at Curtis, understand his model, maybe invite Catholic Charities in. You can look at some of these other NGOs like Quo Vadis Catholic that is activating these convents and rectories for a much smaller, you just need some fresh paint and move some young adults in, and you can get revenue that way. So just being creative and adaptive and coming to places like this to ask those questions and getting that toolkit.
Thanks. Thank you, David. One of our students in Rome, his capstone, he's from the Diocese of Kitui. I believe that's in Sierra Leone, if I'm not confused, but I've been up since early, so if I got that wrong, please forgive me. He did a project that was really interesting where there wasn't enough money to provide the kind of like the evangelization services, the catechetical services to students, but they had extra space at the parish. And so what he did was they were in a somewhat urban area with a lot of migrant workers. And so what they did was he came up with a plan that is going into effect. We're waiting looking forward to the updates. Sorry, Kitui is in Kenya. Thank you. Somebody just corrected me. And so with this project, they will provide housing for migrant workers who come in during the week. So it's safe, affordable housing. And then in turn, that will provide the revenue to provide the programs for catechetics and schooling and so forth that they need. So it's just a really integrative use of already existing property. And that's what's so fascinating to me, is that we already have the property. It's just a question of using it. Curtis, excuse me, Brian, if I could turn to you, I wanted to ask you, do you have could you speak to the challenge of looking at historic buildings, renovating historic buildings, because you have the ties to the community, you have the cost. At times it's simply prohibitive, and yet you want to either maintain, if it's a sacred space, you want to maintain the sacred aspect of it, or at least create, again, some sort of a legacy. It sounded like you've done a lot of that work in Grand Rapids.
I have. Some advantages that we have here in my area, which I can of course speak to only, is that in a lot of these buildings are in historic districts. So they're urban settings where the city or the municipality has established that building to be in a historic district, which then requires or impels the building owner, in this case the church, to make repairs to the building regularly. They're monitored, and they also have to comply to historic standards, which almost accidentally means that they're going to be done better, because often the materials and the methods involved are better quality. Apart from that, the other element that's very important is the community itself of that parish. And it's often the case that historic buildings have been the physical home of a particular community that might be based on a particular nationality. So for example, a Polish parish here in the Midwest will have a great deal of pride in the building itself, that their forebears had made great sacrifices to build, and that legacy then continues on. So there's a cultural element too. So on the one hand, you have almost a legal thing that happens to push that quality and that maintenance forward, and sometimes it's cultural. And other times it's cultural beyond the parish, in the community, where we've had instances where the parish leaders will appeal to the city and to the community in their fundraising to help undertake some of these rather expensive repairs or improvements, to say, you also share in the ownership of this building because you use it for your weddings. It's a backdrop of your daily life, this beautiful structure. And we think that it's time to, put a little money in the kitty to make sure that this building is in good condition. Now that it doesn't always work in some economies, but in ours, it was quite successful. And that, of course, was built on the relationships that those leaders had already established in their community with their peers. So those are three different ways that I've seen happen well to help maintain a building. And then, of course, the fourth I would list would be regular maintenance. That sometimes that some of the most successful things I've seen happen are very uneventful and quite mundane and really rather boring. And it's that every 6 months of having somebody walk around the building, check all the locks, make sure the windows aren't broken, get up on the roof and look for leaks, and all of those little mundane things that we do. If you think of the building as a representation of a person, which it isn't, of course, but with that same spirit, you can say, well, what would be an exercise program for this building? How do we go at it from an idea of long-term small maintenance points, like we do when we choose the food we drink, to make sure that this building is loved and cared for over time. And then those great big grand repairs don't even really have to happen because the building's been maintained well. So that's another thing that I would mention is, and that's really cultural and spiritual and social also, in that the community understands that and are willing to put money into that budget, month in, month out to maintain it and to prevent catastrophic repair. Now, and again, I'm acknowledging that I'm looking at folks here from around the world who obviously have a very different culture and a very different set of circumstances. But I think going at it, again, to go back to the first point, that the building is a community gift, really is the foundation of all of those benefits.
Thank you very much, Brian. Sophie, if I, just before we get to Q&A, one of the things that strikes me is a little bit different from the project that you've been involved in is you've taken the spaces that really didn't need a lot of work. It wasn't so much a question of transforming a space, but finding a space for your project. And many of your spaces some of your spaces are focused on the arts. Why did you focus projects on the arts for the disabled?
Okay. Well, some of our places, we don't have to be afraid of using humble spaces, and sometimes it's good to start something somewhere small and then something can grow. My experience has been that sometimes starting somewhere in some place with something small can really grow, also in unexpected ways. Yes, we have this experience of having art labs with people with special needs. We have 10 of them in Rome. Most of them are in the periphery, sometimes in humble places in the periphery, but we make them beautiful with the artwork we make. So we decided to make arts together because there is a love for beauty. And art is an instrument for many people with special needs to express themselves. And we've discovered how profound sometimes their thoughts can be and how much we can learn from them. And art is there really a very surprising instrument. And art makes life more beautiful, and also the places where we are. And so you have been, Pia, in the restaurant we run in Rome, and I think there you see that how important it is that the places we have and the places we use, that they are beautiful, because we need beauty, and the church speaks to us about beauty, and people need beauty, and I think we have to give an important value to it. And so our people with special needs have been helping us in this, and so I'm very happy with this. And yes, they with their art, they help us to live better.
Thank you, Sophie. It's the first time I went to the restaurant, I was struck by the art, and I thought, wow, if they're disabled, what am I? Because there's no way that I can create that art. It definitely, I love how these programs and this innovation is always, it continually underscores the dignity of the human person. I want to turn to some of our questions in the Q&A. David O'Brien asks, says, these have been great webinars. How are we going to, do we have any thoughts on how to create a framework that ensures that the faithful will benefit from these programs? So on the part of GICM, we're going to continue, we will be featuring these webinars on our website so that people can go to them at any time. Those webinars will also be subtitled. So that way, if you don't understand our particular accents and so forth, you'll be able to read the subtitles, and then we'll be doing clips from them. But really for property, I think that's David's wheelhouse. David, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I think it's kind of an ecosystem that requires both the financial management skills that GICM is promoting, but I think it also requires the shift for kind of the consumer Catholic that I think many people have fallen into to consumed Catholic. And what I mean by that is, I guess for David, it would be more of, we have to ensure, like, we have to step up as a laity, and it can't just continually fall upon people in position or people in authority to kind of be the, oh, well, they've got it. I think it requires the laity to really rise up and say, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to go explore different real estate options that are going to bring in revenue, and we want transparency. We want accountability for where those dollars are going and how it's spent. And that's part and parcel with what the church should be doing. That's in canon law. That's in, just kind of good governance structures. And so that's what we mean of that kind of ecosystem that GICM and the work that they do kind of allow for the proper management of real estate and the dollars that are involved. So it's kind of, it's not simply a real estate question. It's not simply a spiritual question. It's kind of this whole financial, spiritual ecosystem. So I would say, good transparency, being involved and saying, hey, where is this going? And I want to ensure what Brian was talking about of the continued small incremental kind of facilities management, and as opposed to waiting for this kind of catastrophic boom of, oh my gosh, now we need millions of dollars. But just creating a culture of transparency.
And I think just to clarify too, GICM, through our program of church management in Rome and soon programs in other places around the globe, will provide the hard skills teach people the hard skills to begin to tackle these projects. And then the idea is that FIRE would be kind of the hub for the deep dive that collects all the research, because obviously program of church management, we've got a big enough mission as it is. Fitzgerald Institute for Real Estate can take on the collecting of the information and really serve as a kind of a consulting hub. Here's a question. For all the speakers, as we discuss real estate, it seems that for every one of our speakers, people, community, and relationships are front and center. That's no surprise for the church. But how can the church leverage human, natural, and supernatural talent for better real estate management? And how can the latter promote the former in a virtuous cycle? Who would like to take that one?
Well, if I may, I think we're doing a little bit of it right here, which is to have organizations that are focusing on this is important. And in addition to that, there are also there must be also other more specifically institutes more specifically ordered towards specific skills. So I think what the work that the organizations here are doing create more or less the backdrop of the conversation. But then over time, I would imagine that that other institutes will arise that deal with the particulars. But I think a lot of that will naturally spin off from the work that these organizations are doing now, and how exactly that gets in. So an individual who has a specific skill or specific talent will, I would imagine, flourish working with you, and then they may in turn be called to create something of their own that focuses on a particular aspect of it. And there are many particular aspects that need flourishing. So I would say it would start here.
Thank you. Anyone else want to jump in?
Can I? The question is, of course, the church property has the right to be managed in a very professional way, but it's the church, the community of the church who owns these things, and we have to make always decisions in the light of the mission of the church, and we have to be community first of all. Community, there we are with whoever we are. Community in the evangelical sense of the word, and then we have to take decisions together in the best way possible. We have probably, when we have to, as the church is doing, we have to train people to manage the money well, because the money is important. We know it even from in the gospel, how money can be mismanaged too. But we have to be good disciples. That's always our first call, be good disciples, and so manage also the money in a proper way. And there has to be a collaboration, I think, on a very local level. Everybody has to take his responsibility. It's not only the big board or the big institution, you know, the church is not a business in say. It has to run business well, but it's not a business. So I think we have to, people have to take responsibilities locally, and I think we have not to be afraid to involve many people in this, because people, when you manage something together, you feel responsible for it and you will care for it in a very nice way. Our experience is also not to be afraid to ask for help to other people. Sometimes you are very surprised how many people want to help and want to offer a contribution. And sometimes, yes, the problem is really we need money to do something. So where do we get the money from? And let's not many people want to help. I've seen that many times. People are happy to help, but they don't know how, and they're happy when they can help. So let's not be afraid of this. And yes, we have to be good disciples. I think that's really always, it has always to be the first point of the first departure point. I don't know if it's a help to resolve the question.
Absolutely, Sophie, thank you. And I think too, just we have a concept of real estate development in media. It's always the evil bad person that's coming in to destroy a community, rather than talking about many of the positive aspects that, such as Curtis referred to, where you kind of actually lift the community up. And so I think that the church is in the business of saving souls and can help out with formation for professionals who are serving not just the nonprofit church world, but also the for-profit secular world. And that will go a long way. David has a clarification here in his question that I'd like to address. He says, for example, if we were to provide senior housing program in a city center, how do we ensure that our parishioners benefit so that they find it easier to go to mass, etc.? If you work with a public office, then prioritizing the Catholic formation can be a challenge. Curtis, this seems to be something that would be in your wheelhouse.
Sure, I will tell you, in my experience when we would do these projects, and so let's stick with the example of senior housing. Look, the parish is first of all already greatly involved, and you've already heard from my co-panelists Sophie and Brian talk about the fact that it's very localized. I mean, and even with church property, the real estate maxim does not change: location, location, location. And so then the second point is to find the various skills and abilities that the parishioners have. But more importantly, when you look at it, I will tell you, oftentimes, 9 times out of 10, at least 50% of the new residents that you bring into the property on the church project have some relationship to the parish, whether they were parishioners themselves, whether they were volunteers. Because remember, really strong parishes and who have an awesome reputation in the community, they branch out and they spread out. And so when they do the turkey drive or food programs or whatever it is, these things go beyond just the parishioners. And so that brings in the whole collective. And finally, I just say, you look at it and the properties and the maintenance of them and the way we operate, I will tell you, funders across the country love conversions to affordable housing from Catholic charities across the board, because number one, most of them look as good as they looked from the dedication to 20 years later, and you can't tell. Secondly, most of them, you know, people have this idea of what affordable housing is in their mind, but you go see a property that's done by one of our member agencies, and you don't know it's affordable until somebody tells you. So it fits within the community. It's the design aspects are within the community. The need aspects are built within the community. So, you know, you may want to do a senior project, but you know what, we might say, family is what you need in this area. This is better. And then next thing you know, you have more families in the parish. And trust me, the reputation from that good, solid project goes a long way. And next thing you know, the property itself becomes a form of evangelization, because people are looking at it saying, wow, this is what they do.
So one of the things that strikes me too, I just want to pull out, both, particularly with Sophie and Curtis, you're talking about, you know, we'll talk about projects, right? The first time I went to Trattoria degli Amici in Rome, I had no idea that this was a project of any sort. It just looked like a trendy restaurant in Trastevere, lots of people eating. I didn't notice that there was something particular about it until someone with Down syndrome served me my food. And then I looked down and the placemat explained the whole scope of it. And I like what we're talking about here, because it's bringing a certain level of professionalism to these projects, whether it's a restaurant for employing people with special needs or residences for a particular audience, but we're bringing in professional best practices to figure out how can we do this as well as possible. And this is where I want to segue into a question that we have here. Look, we know what the best practices are known. How do we better leverage these so that the laity can access them and implement them at the through stronger and better equipped councils, parish council, finance council, schools council? But we've got to, there's kind of a disconnect. And David and I have spoken a lot about this. There's like the secular world that has figured out, for example, how to inventory property, and sometimes the church still hasn't figured that part out. So how do we bring these best practices from the secular world to our faith-based world and make them accessible for people in parishes and dioceses at different levels to utilize them?
Of course, I speak as a lay person, so I like the question about the involvement of laity. I think everybody can do something. Nobody is too poor or too weak or to do something, and it's very important, because it means that everybody can be a Christian and everybody can do something to build up the church, even if it's very small. And that's a very, very important basis, I think, to work, to involve as much people as possible, even in small little things. But it gives a lot of dignity to, well, we see it in a more particular way with our people with special needs, how doing something and how creating something and how contributing to society gives you a lot of dignity. But it's true for everybody of us. When people allow us to be involved and allow us to take up some kind of responsibility, even if it's a very small one, then we start being part of it, and then you can create things together. And I think that's a very, very important key. Yes.
Great. Very quickly, we have a question from one of our students, and maybe again, Curtis, this might be a good question for you. What is the relationship between the church and state in running a private and low-cost housing scheme in terms of taxation and support? I know that varies country by country. Are there some quick principles that, or quick guidelines that you could give before we wrap up?
Sure, you're absolutely right, and it's very localized. I mean, it's even different among our member agencies here in the States, and so you have to take a look at it, and it's very involved. And number one, it depends. Are you going to utilize any funding sources from those other entities, or are you, in other words, going to fund this yourself or fund it with partners? When we're talking about some of the larger senior housing projects, certainly the state, even the feds federal government becomes part of it in the partnership. So there are some things that we have to look at and make sure that we can accommodate for that. I will say, when it comes to taxation, again, it's localized, but oftentimes there are certain breaks for doing certain types of projects. So you may get a tax abatement or a payment in lieu of taxes, what we go. And I'm not trying to be too technical, but there are breaks for helping a municipality, because remember, you're not only helping doing the work of our mission in the church, but you're helping that community with this this new project, this new usage. Even what Sophie talked about with the homeless project, that's helping the entire community. So what Brian's talking about in building up this workforce to help maintain these things, that's helping the entire community. So all those things lead together, and there are really key aspects to it that bring some advantages because we are faith-based, because we are the church. So yeah, that's there, but it's very localized. I'll just say real quickly, conversations like these are what pulls this together, shares the best practices. And for me, one of the best ways to do it was always after each project, the next one I'd go to, I'd say, Father, let me take you down and let's go see what we just did. And then he can have that conversation with his fellow priest. And those are kind of things that lead to those best practices. And finally, I'll always say, no matter how complicated these things get, Sophie said it, Brian said it, someone always can participate, because we can have all these architectural and design professionals in the room, and somebody who knows nothing about doing these deals ask a very simple question that is overlooked by this group of professionals because it's very simple. It's right there in front of us. So everybody can participate. Thank you.
Thank you, Curtis. So as we wrap up, I just want to be mindful of everyone's time. I'm so glad that you could all join us. Especially grateful to our panelists taking time out of their very busy schedules. I think we can all see that the potential here is huge. And we talk frequently that the church is the largest landowner in the world. David gave that number there that comprises the church real estate would make up the size of the country of France. But we don't act like the largest landowner. And so there's so many opportunities, I think, and it's really a question of getting creative, knowing communities, knowing needs, and really what I hear too, listening to our panelists finally is not only the professional expertise, but the inspiration of the Holy Spirit and really a following and a listening. I want to, just as we wrap up, want to remind everybody, so we're gearing up for this real estate conference in Rome, February 7th through 9th. We hope you can participate in person. We have a banner for it on the gicm.org website where you can get more information, and we'll be sending out details shortly. We are hoping to be able to stream parts or all of it, but of course the in-person experience gives you more opportunity for networking and just the personal connections. With that real estate program, we're actually going to carve out our first specialized executive session. So normally we have the executive sessions in Rome, which feature a chunk of our usual curriculum. And this is going to be specialized. It will include the 2.5 days of the real estate conference, and then a day of executive level project planning, and a day and a half of executive level change management. So we will be posting information about that very soon. Just keep that on your radar. And as well, you can look up on the PCM website our regular curriculum intensive week, which will be January 31st through February 4th. Lastly, just want to, again, thank you all. And these ideas have just been, it's incredible. And I never, like I said, I never thought I'd find real estate so interesting. I hope you can join us for our next webinar, Legal Legacy, which I think is going to go deep into some of the tricky questions and the relationships between a parish and a diocese, donor intent. These are questions that are popping up everywhere. So I hope you can join us. We'll be sending you updates. And as always, we ask for your support, especially through prayer. If you can just pray for the work of a program of church management in Rome, of the Global Institute of Church Management, of FIRE, and of all of our panelists here. And let's continue to build the vineyard and do work for the Lord. Thank you so much.